Okay, let us know when we're on.
Hello?
All right. Well, okay. So everybody, I want to thank you, and I know I'll talk to Tracy in just a moment. I want to thank you for joining us. As you may know, I'm Representative Dan Miller. You are tuning in to our next presentation here on this year's Disability and Mental Health Summit. You're also on our first ever virtual summit, which has its fun points, as well as we try to be sure that we have everything working. So anyhow, we are glad to do it. We started off today with a very good discussion with Secretary Beatty from Maryland, Secretary of Disabilities. It's fantastic to hear some of her insights as to how having a Secretary of Disabilities can be helpful. And then we also heard from Aaron Dalton, the new Director of Allegheny County's Human Services, which again, very insightful, a lot of good information. And then of course, we're getting into our sessions to which you are tuning in. So while I give Tracy another minute or two here, I want to be sure that everybody knows a couple things here. Please be sure to send a couple questions. I'll loop on when we're done here towards the end. We'll try to answer some questions with Tracy and get some of her expertise. So do send them there. Don't forget, for those of you who may be a little bit off with this, there's no continuing education this year. All right, we just couldn't get it working on our tech, right? It couldn't be done. So we could not get that worked out. So we apologize for that. We look forward to being back in person with that feature as well. This, of course, being our 8th Disability and Mental Health Summit. We love trying to expand the opportunities, but this is the limitations of a pandemic year with what we can do. Okay, so that being said, and I think Tracy, are you good?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right. So look, I want to be sure to again to welcome you here. This is the COVID-19 classroom, desperate impact effects on mental health and educations of vulnerable populations with Dr. Tracy Scanlon. So Tracy's been with us, I'm going to say at least a couple of times over the year. So we appreciate that. She is the critical incident responder, with Allegheny County's emergency response team, the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, and the Allegheny County Police Department. Currently, Dr. Scanlon is the clinical director at Outreach Teen and Family Services here in Mount Lebanon, which is, I admit, a little biased too. It's a fantastic organization. She maintains a private practice as well, very busy, private practice in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, where she focuses on trauma and loss. So we're very glad to have her back with us again. And Tracy, so we're going to turn it over to you. And thank you for joining us today. It's always good to see you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. As Representative Miller said, that I'm coming to you from Outreach Teen and Family Services. We're located on Washington Road in Mount Lebanon. And what we do here is we offer professional, confidential, private, and easily accessible counseling for children, teens, and their families. And as the pandemic has gone on and as things have sort of been prolonged, we have been serving more and more young people and their families who are both atypical learners and who are also struggling with some of their emotional wellness these days, which I think we could all agree that many of us are, that the expectations, the rapid pace of change, all of the things that we have had to sort of rebuild and create some sort of new normal from have really taxed us as adults, let alone as children who have less power, less intellectual capacity to seek out and speak about what they need. So what I'm going to talk about today is two things that are, to me, very closely linked, right? That we know that atypical learners are kiddos in the public school system who have IEPs, who have 504 plans. If they're in a parochial school, they call it a growth plan. Nonetheless, they are entitlements that a child has that offers them support, both academic and emotional and social. And some of those services suffered very, very greatly since March of 2020 last year. It just became an overwhelming job for the public school system to firstly turn everything over and make it virtual in a smooth fashion. Also to provide the technology that children and families would need in order to do this, but also to keep up with the law, no waivers, the IDEA law. And we'll get into that. We'll get into that a little bit more, but the gist of the, I guess the issue or the problem or the challenge as I see it is that there's a variance among the students in the public school system, and the impact on atypical learners is far greater, and the data supports this, has been far greater than those of typical learners. The impact, the negative impact on kids with a mental health diagnosis, or even just a set of symptoms, not even a diagnosis, not even a label, has been far greater than children that I guess we would say came into the pandemic with a normal baseline. Whatever normal is, of course. I mean, that's relative. And the losses, the academic losses to children, especially atypical learners. There's the summer slide, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but there also is, aptly called these days the COVID slide, which has had a pretty serious impact on the academic lives of all of the children in the public school system. And an interesting fact I want to share with you is that the learning between students of higher performing academic achievement and lower learning achievement are the two groups with the most disparities. So in other words, high achievers, probably a larger gap, a larger loss. Lower learning students with atypical learning challenges or mental health issues, maybe if this is normal, they're here, and now they're here. And that's, so the higher learning and the lower learning children, teens, high school students, all across from K through 12, have had the most variance, and that should be noted. That should be noted. The research talks about, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the COVID slide and COVID slowdowns. And, teachers warned us at the very beginning that this kind of thing would happen. Probably didn't have a name at the very beginning, but now we have named it. And they also warned us because they know our children, and they know what they're doing, and they know what was going to happen when the academic world, the school world, turned upside down. They warned us that the slide for COVID would be far, far greater than anything that would have ever occurred over a summer holiday period. I mean, it's built into the curriculum as you go back into school the next year. There's some recovery of the learning, there's some review of the learning. But now we're talking about, some children who have been out of the building, although, some have returned, but many out of the building for over a year now. And that slide started last March. Then there was a summer slide at home for those children. And then there's the slide that's occurring in this academic year. Interestingly, students between the 3rd and the 5th grade are more likely to experience the greatest loss. And I looked for data. I looked for information about what is so pivotal about 3rd and 5th grades, because, honestly, anecdotally, as an instructor myself at the college level, and, as a counselor, I think I was a little bit more worried at the beginning about the middle school transition, because that's kind of brutal and stressful under normal circumstances. And then I think the public generally focused on juniors and seniors as that group being maybe the one to more likely experience academic loss and also social and emotional loss. But it's the 3rd and 5th graders. Also alarmingly, K through second grade, so we've got kindergartners, first graders, and second graders, are predicted to enter the next academic year almost a full year behind with school matters. And I have to say, I would imagine socially and emotionally, there may have been a slide too, especially in that group. So there's a real need for quick, swift, and mindful remedy to put into place as we hopefully move back into the 21-22 school year in the fall. But the supports that have to exist, the new supports that have to be put into place, can't even be remotely close to what we have always used in the public school system. I mean, frankly, folks are honest about it. It's a strained system anyway, and this has placed an exorbitant and unmeasurable amount of additional strain on that system. So some of the adverse and long-term impacts that have been predicted, some of them have already been seen. Most of them, I believe, and I think you will see if you look at the research, have just exemplified, increased the inequalities that have already existed. In March 2020, I mean, we remember it well, it was around St. Patrick's Day, right? Everything sort of went a little wild and crazy. Only 20% of students with disabilities maintained or received the services that they were entitled to since then. Now, I understand the law. I understand the Secretary of Education's proclamation that there will be no waivers, there will be no child left behind in certain words. The schools will not be excused of their duties. Well, that's fantastic. That in theory, absolutely. However, in implementation, given the rapid way that the schools sort of disintegrated their normal way of doing business, lots of children were left without their entitlements. Lots of parents didn't know who to ask. I hear this all the time, even out of pandemic times, but so much more now. Who do I ask the information of, right? Am I allowed to be asking for A, B, and C? Is that part of what my child is allowed to have? And how is it that I navigate this system? Because I can't seem to find a clear line, a linear line from start to finish that's black and white and very clear. And these parents were not only, of course, advocating in the same way that they've always advocated, but they were now having to be advocates, teachers, recess monitors, frankly, researchers. Lots of questions what do I do? How do I do it? How do I create a new routine? Trial and error. I have to set up a space for my child. The teachers will tell you what a struggle it is working with children, doing well working with children with atypical learning patterns or emotional struggles. And they're the trained experts, and they have the resources and the wherewithal and the place to do it. And suddenly it became our job as untrained professionals, untrained teachers, to provide all of this. 39% of the entitled atypical learners in the public school system in the United States received 0 services at all. That means the TSSs weren't in the classroom. That means the virtual classroom. The paraprofessionals were not accessible. If there was an IEP, who was directing it? Who was meeting? Could you make a meeting happen virtually? And of the 744 public school districts in the United States, over 75% of them, 75% of our schools in the United States reported that it was almost impossible or extraordinarily difficult to do the job of special education. I mean, I think that really tells us a lot about the fractures in the system, right? it's never really been a perfect system, but then it fractured, well, almost in a way that I don't think it can be repaired. But my thought about that is, why not use the pandemic as the pivot, as the chance to revamp the system as we know it for students with disabilities, especially for students with mental health struggles or challenges, but for all students. I mean, this is the time, right? We had the structure, we had the theoretical structure. We watched it crumble. We watched really dedicated educators and administrators try to lift it back up, put the pieces together, build the plane as they fly. But we're still left with a lot of gaps. And my personal sense is that this might be the exact right moment in time to revamp. So I'm hoping that that's part of what's going to happen, and that that's what parents will advocate for, and that some of the bills that are in the legislature now will get passed, and that IDA will at some point finally be completely funded, which it never has been in its entire existence. So we know that special education services were imperfect before the pandemic. We know that there's been a lot of fallout, a lot of lawsuits, in fact, in local school districts, in Pittsburgh Public School District, where parents have had to take legal action to get the entitlements for their children that they would have gotten if the pandemic hadn't occurred. So isn't this the time, maybe? I mean, isn't this the chance that we can rebuild something? Instead of shaping the children to fit the system or the structure, now's the time to rebuild the system or structure to fit the child and the needs and the various unique things that all children bring to school. We know that when children go to school, they are the recipients of academic services, but they also build relationships, not just with their peers, but importantly with their peers. But the mentoring, informal or formal, the socialization, the de facto parenting that children get when they are in the building and they have challenges that make going to school and succeeding in school a little bit more difficult than for a typical child. The kids lost out on all of that too. There was not just, and I think it gets talked about a little bit, it doesn't get talked about enough. We focus a lot on the academics, and I understand that, and the entitlements, and we must. But what is the emotional tool? I mean, that's where the data is coming in now, because we didn't expect to be here a year later. I think the human spirit, right? We're human animals. We have an instinct to fight, to preserve, to adjust. I mean, that was the whole premise of Darwin, right? The fit will survive. Those of us who can adjust and continue to adjust, because that's what life calls on all of the time, we probably do a little bit better emotionally. But with this upside down world and this unexpected life that we were all thrown into with no preparation and much disbelief about what we were supposed to do, how we were supposed to do it, or how long it would happen, also took a huge toll emotionally and socially on families of typical learners and atypical learners, family units, generations, people in the workplace, teachers. One of the primary things, according to the data, that caused such strain on the ability to adjust was not just that this pandemic occurred, that there was a scary virus, that kids were becoming privy to, medical information or visuals on the television of, people in plastic tents and makeshift morgues. I mean, there was only so much that parents could do to protect their children from knowing some of these things. And that took, that took an emotional toll. But the bottom line is, it's the rapid nature with which this occurred, followed up by the response we gave. So pandemic, closure, put the kids at home, we're going to educate them. It happened in the blink of an eye. And then as we were doing it, we weren't necessarily doing it very well at the beginning. The rapid change and our response were two of the main factors that weigh in and factor in when you're talking about how well a child is going to do psychosocially or psycho-emotionally. In addition to that, we can't forget the parents, right? You know who you are, and you know what it was like, and I know what it was like, and what it's still like to a large degree. There's a concept in psychology called self-efficacy. And all that really means is, I mean, it's a huge element to the human spirit. But what it really boils down to is, if I have a good amount of self-efficacy, that means that in my mind, consciously and subconsciously, I believe I have what it takes to face whatever comes my way. So it's not confidence, and it's not just competencies, but it's a self-belief that no matter what comes my way, I can reach over here into my toolbox and 99% of the time figure it out. Well, this pandemic robbed most of us of our self-efficacy. In addition, it robbed most of us, at least on the short term, of our sense of emotional stability, right? There was no work-life balance. Parents who advocate for children with mental health issues or academic issues were suddenly working 40-hour jobs, being the teacher, being a parent who's an advocate for a child who has some special sense of needs. And what happened was, and it's no small thing, we have to look at it, because here's the thing, everyone. We can rush back or long for or talk about things being normal sometime soon, but that's normal as far as the way we operate business and logistics in a world. Psychologically, I don't believe that we will go back to a normal baseline, a belief in ourselves, a level of confidence in ourselves, a level of belief that we can do whatever it takes and figure it out. I think it's going to be a very, very long time before we reach almost a cultural recovery. I think about it, it reminds me a little bit of after 9/11, there was really and truly almost a cultural post-traumatic stress response. And it took a long time if you were paying attention. Yeah, the crisis, the drama, the news coverage, that goes away pretty quickly. But as a culture, we've changed forever. And it was very profound at the beginning. Well, and on that note, I should mention, I didn't include this earlier, but there's new talk about the DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. So it's the physician's desk reference for mental health diagnosis. It's something insurance companies have to use, but it gets edited about every 10 years. And now they might include a new disorder in the next manual, but right now insurance companies are looking at it to place in our toolbox right now as clinicians to assign this disorder to someone so you can get paid in a certain way, and so that person is entitled to services. And it's called the COVID post-traumatic stress response. And we're adults. And so when we talk about children and teens, you have to know that the gravity of the situation is even more profound for them. And then you take it to another level where it might be an atypical learner who cannot articulate, who cannot respond in a certain way, or, kids who are already anxious or depressed, who interpret the stimuli around them as already threatening. And then we place them in a drastically threatening situation, which is the pandemic. Also, according to a lot of the research, and again, I think we live this, I don't think this is anything that's going to surprise anyone. There's a lot of burnout, and that burnout is not just burnout for the teachers and the administrators who, worked double time, triple time, had to get super creative and do things they had never had to do before in order to engage their students. But staying at home, children staying at home with parents who were also required to stay home and to also work, placed a lot of strain on the family system. And parents have talked a lot about this rapid adjustment period and the tension that was there and the anxiety that was there and how the disrupted routines. I mean, we know that for all children, what one of the most beautiful things that school provides, right, is routine, right? I'm a routine person. You take me out of my routine, I get a little nervous. I don't know what to expect. And then you think about that kind of feeling as it relates to a child, no matter what label exists or doesn't exist for that child. The disruption to the routine, the inability to access the support, the pressure on the family system, we weren't able to adapt and adjust as swiftly as we were required to do because of the way the pandemic, set off, right? And so this has created a level of burnout among parents that, typically wouldn't have been seen before. Part of the reason, I think that all of our children and all of us as adults on a continuum, of course, some people adjusted very well, very quickly. Some people adjusted finally, some people adjusted in a very swift fashion. And some folks struggled more than what would be considered average or normal. But the bottom line is, on that continuum, the strain came from a sense of loss, a sense of a need for adjustment, and a sense of out of control changes. And that's for parents and that's for children as well. Worry can sometimes be very adaptive, right? Worry, it can cause tension, and tension causes the pressure that impels us to make changes or to tackle something or to take something on or to make a change that needs to be changed or needs to be had. However, when we are asked to change and adjust in a way that overtaxes us, we struggle. And when we are overtaxed, we get more anxious as a group, we get more depressed as a group. And how I explain it when I'm talking with adults, parents that call us here at Outreach, or, for folks that I work with in other places, it comes down to a basic cost benefits analysis. I mean, so, we all pay taxes, right? So in the end, we hope when we go to our accountant that we have paid the toll, right? And that we come out, we don't owe anything. Be nice to have something come back, but worst case scenario, as long as there was a tax and we met the requirement for that tax, all is well. Psychologically, if this is normal baseline and we are called upon in a crisis, which obviously the pandemic was, to change, adjust, move, do something differently at a very fast pace, we run out of money here. We run out of money to pay the tax. And so mood goes down and anxiety goes up. And that happened unilaterally in the mental health world, in the special education world, and among adults, young adults, school-age children, and young children. It may look different, it may manifest differently, the symptoms may look different, the way we talk about it looks differently, but it occurred across the culture on a continuum to one degree or another. The strain on the family system resulted in a lot of surveys being done, a lot of data trying to be collected. The Parent Action Advocacy Group, Parent Ping, they did a lot of research and asking parents in real time what was happening for them. And one of the polls that I'm looking at here that I wanted to share with you is one that reported out from Parent Ping that 40% of parents of primary school pupils reported midway through the pandemic that they were feeling and doing and coping worse than at the initial lockdown point. I think that's just more evidence for the fact that we have to recognize that this tax on us psychologically, psycho-emotionally, financially, it began to take too great of a toll because it occurred over too long of a period of time, and people hit a COVID wall, COVID anxiety, COVID depression. I mean, every conversation starts with some element like that these days. I will share with you that here at Outreach, for the first several years that I was involved clinically with the counselors here, the number one reason for referral, so in other words, the number one reason that parents call in to access support for their kids, or the number one reason that teens call in to get access to services for themselves, was depression. I mean, that's the common cold of all mental health disorders. We know this. 2 years ago, anxiety went up a notch and depression fell into the number 2 spot. I can assure you beyond the shadow of a doubt that 99% of the calls that I have taken from the beginning of the pandemic to right up to this moment in time are all related to anxiety. And this is often what the parent says. I have my normal little boy, my normal little girl, just using that generically, is sad or anxious and has never been in their life, and they want help and they want someone to talk to, and they aren't coping well with COVID. So imagine our little ones or our teens who already had some anxiety or who already had some depression, and then they had to live this way for a year and we're still living in this way. It exacerbated symptoms that already existed, but for a huge pocket of people who were not a part of accessing mental health services, it's gone through the roof. Now, that's not about pathology to me. That's about the typical reason that people go into therapy in the grown-up adult world. Life adjustment issues, right? Job loss, divorce, broken heart, moving, anything, life adjustment. But we were asking young people to make an adjustment that we couldn't even guide them through. 3 out of 10 parents of primary school students that were also surveyed in the Parent Ping survey polled at believing that their child was significantly more anxious than they had ever known their child to be pre-pandemic. What we know here is that, the bottom line, we could save it till the very end of the end of our discussion, but what we know here is 2 things, right, everyone? The school system has got to do a complete overhaul to not only eliminate disparities that have historically existed, but to eliminate the new growing disparities that were a year in the making and will be going on for years to come. Secondly, the mental health system is grossly overburdened at this point. No one could prepare. There are far more clients or patients or whatever people want to term them in need right now than there are clinicians, psychiatrists, therapists, social workers. So those 2 systems that our vulnerable children really rely on for support are really in bad shape. And families raising atypical learners, you know this, the stress level, the need for extra support is far higher all the time than it is for maybe a family who doesn't have a child with anxiety or a child with autism or a child with a reading or learning disorder. And so that creates an extra burden for both of those systems as we move forward. And unless we're working on it right now and working on it swiftly and diligently, it'll be years and years before recovery can actually occur. Now, I did mention this already, but I did want to reiterate that anecdotally, what I see in this local community is that more and more of the reason that people and children and teens are asking for help is because they're mismanaging or not being able to manage anxiety. The other thing is that often parents will call and say, I've called everywhere, I've looked everywhere, no one will take my child, there are no openings. In the private practice world, as I mentioned, there are far more adults newly involved in the system who are seeking services than there are therapists who can take them on. That's creating a whole new gap. We already know about the gaps in mental health systems. We already know about the gaps in schools. And so, as schools go, we can talk about no waivers and we can talk about the history. I mean, IDEA has been in effect for almost 50 years. Are you aware? I mean, this statistic surprised me a little bit, that it has never one time in 5 decades reached its promise of paying fully and completely for students with disabilities. Never, not one time in 50 years. Now that system's going to be overburdened for the next few years to catch up on a backlog. I don't know how IDEA can't change. There's going to have to be sweeping changes to the expectations. There are 7 million children in the United States in public school systems. So that's not private schools and parochial schools. 7 million kids in the public school system who are, that's 15 or 16% of the general school age population, who have IEPs or tailored education plans that they need in order to succeed, and they're not getting the services. Ask any teacher, ask any administrator who's willing to talk frankly about it. There was a real scramble, and the tailored IEP, the tailored growth plan, really became the responsibility of the parent. Who could you get on the phone? Was there access to virtual meetings? How can you hold someone accountable when you really maybe can't even see their face or walk into their office and have a meeting? We weren't in great shape historically with IDEA and with special education. Special ed students, they graduate far less than non-special ed students. Children in special ed are 2 times more likely to be suspended. Children in the juvenile justice system are or who have a piece in the juvenile justice system are far more likely to be suspended as well. Children with learning struggles sometimes can't do anything but allow those struggles to manifest behaviorally, and so that's why the system can be punitive. The experts tell us that if IDEA were followed to the letter of the law and fully funded, 90% of all special education children would matriculate successfully. We've got some ways to go. And now we've got a huge backlog that is going to hamper the system and the return back to normal as we envision it. The other issue that I think people should be aware of is that states have often waived some of the restrictions for special education professionals so that we could get more special ed folks in the classroom and get more paraprofessionals in the classroom to assist them. But when we couldn't find the graduates to do that, when we couldn't find the well-trained paraprofessionals to do that, a lot of the states in the country lowered the bar for the minimum requirements. During the pandemic, even more states lowered the bar, lowered the level of minimum standards, and now people, probably very good-hearted people that are getting placed in the classroom to support or to teach, are underskilled and undersupported. And that also means that the vulnerable children in those classrooms are going to get less of an appropriate education, less of the meaningful supports that they're entitled to. The pandemic has really turned the public school system upside down. Almost 90% of parents polled throughout the pandemic at two different points, at the beginning and at the midway point, reported that they felt that school closure, so the building itself closing, significantly changed the well-being of what they saw as the well-being of their children and impacted their children to a great degree. 70% of those parents are concerned that, of all things, they watch their children's self-esteem plummet. That's just not about academics, right? That's psycho-emotional, that's social, that's isolation, that's worry. All of those factors weigh in here. Some children had extreme reactions. Some people didn't have extreme reactions. But when the special ed parents were polled, it showed that all of the very high risky numbers that we saw for atypical and non-mental health related families was substantially higher. So we're always taking a vulnerable family and a vulnerable set of children. And the pandemic has created far more vulnerability in a system that isn't set up to have handled the normal level of vulnerability in a really positive manner. A few other things. I know that our time is running out, but from a mental health standpoint, what I think people should know, and it's underreported in the media and even in the research. Many parents have either been surveyed, confessed, gone into therapy, told their neighbors, whatever, however it came out, that they started drinking or using drugs, completely started drinking or using drugs during the pandemic, or those who drank every day or drank far more than they ever did as a coping strategy, right? It's disinhibiting to drink. It calms us down, generally speaking, for the first two drinks, maybe. It calms down the central nervous system, but then it just depresses the central nervous system, and then that causes us to be anxious. So we have to look at drug and alcohol usage. We also have to look at the fact, and this is just a fact, domestic violence rates went through the roof. People were trapped in their homes with their violent partners or their violent parent. That's not going to go away easily. That's something that has to be addressed, right? And just the fact that there was so much social isolation. It's decreased a child's savvy, maybe, ability to interact in an appropriate pro-social way. That kind of stuff sort of went out the window. And now we have, I see it with adults. And so now we have to learn that again. For lower income families, what were we focused on? Providing, keeping a job, making sure there was money, and being able to make sure that our child was provided for and getting basically what they needed out of the education system. For upper income families, the emphasis was different. The emphasis was on, I want things back to normal. My children need to be socializing no matter what the risk. And I have to find a way for my children to be in their peer group because that's detrimental to them psychologically to have that be absent. And I'm sure there are a million places in between for the lower and upper middle class families. So lastly, there are two bills introduced in the Senate this summer and in the House in October, and it would provide $12 billion more for students with disabilities. Now, unfortunately, both of those bills have stalled, but I think what many are hoping for is that since President Biden's wife is an educator and there's been a change politically, that perhaps we can get some of the much needed money put into those much needed places and build our kids back up and get stronger again. And lastly, all I would say is I don't think we need to rush back to normal. It didn't work. Normal wasn't working for our kids in the school system, not the way we needed it to. Now's the time. This is a pivot in our shared history. And I think it's time to look at the mental health system and the special ed system and really do some revamping.
Thank you, Dr. Scanlon. We do appreciate your expertise and your thoughts. We do have a couple of questions as well. And I always I have a habit of saying, Doctor, that my experience in relation to COVID-19 has generally been that whatever your problem was before COVID, it is likely worse after COVID.
Absolutely.
And that does seem to remain pretty true. And like you had referenced as well, I don't think many people felt that special education in February 2020 was at its zenith of scope and effectiveness. Clearly, things have moved, I think, in a lot of positive ways over the last 20 years, in particular, since I got my certification as a teacher. But we knew we still had a ways to go. And COVID, of course, has only exacerbated certain problems and inequities that are embedded in Pennsylvania regarding education across the board. That being said, let's look at a couple things. And so I'll try to pull a couple of these things together, a couple of questions. One person had brought up how a local school district is using the federal stimulus dollars it's going to get on capital improvements, which, to be fair, may be more what they're instructed to do. But the person brings up how funding, I imagine a more continued basis for greater school supports for kids, better ratios for school psychologists, those types of things, how that perhaps is being overlooked, and that the federal dollars maybe are coming in to do one time costs, but you need sustained funding to really sort of round that out. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about whether or not we should or how we should go about improving access, embedded services in school districts for kids.
Well, so and I see all that, and I know I understand that that's happening, and like you said, in all fairness, so some of this maybe cannot be helped, or it's intended to do one thing, and an entity finds another way to use the money. But here's the thing: we have always needed to create a system of care in Pennsylvania. There are systems of care across the United States, in Puerto Rico, that create a streamlined way of accessing both academic services and mental health services, and eliminate the silos where the dollars get stuck. And traditionally, Pennsylvania hasn't done a really good job at being able to utilize the funding that does come down the pike in order to really, for a sustained period of time, get rid of some of the issues. It seems to me that it's a pot of money. We do something sort of grand or a sweeping change, and then the feds come in and say, okay, how can you sustain it? Where are you coming up with that money? And we've never really done that very well in the Commonwealth. Hopefully,
Tracy,
yeah.
Just so you know, your camera shut off. I don't know if that's
there's an Amber Alert that came up.
Pay attention to that, Amber.
I'm sorry.
Everybody take a pause.
So right, I mean, I don't know that answers the question, but it is historically what has happened. You'll get a big pile of money at one point to do one or two things. Hopefully people do it, and then suddenly we're on the hook for sustaining it, and we can't figure out how to do that.
Well, and Doctor, you had brought up, of course, how originally federal dollars were supposed to be funding special education, to at the very least a high degree. Of course, we all know how much that has failed over the generation or so. of sort of a broken promise from the feds. So that has only sort of magnified challenges for many school districts, again, before COVID and after COVID,
Right.
in relation to not being or challenges in funding the services that we now know will help kids learn, greater, right? So we know that that has definitely come up. I would note I have a bill, House Bill 102, which is specifically designed to try and to change ratios and to deal with sort of case management in school districts. While I'm right, though, I would always note this. I think that we're right in sort of moving in that direction. It has to be done in a way that the state increases its support for the schools
Right.
in
Right.
dealing with that program. Otherwise, some of these districts will really struggle in financially.
But you do bring up a good point, and that was part of the original question. I think historically we have not put enough money into the school districts to embed mental health professionals, and I think parents hear the word, well, school psychologist or guidance counselor, and that's all good and well, but many times that psychologist is charged with testing and is probably the only person in that building doing it, and the guidance counselor isn't a therapist. And in the parochial school system in Pittsburgh, the AIU sends guidance counselors around for 3 and 4 and 5 local Catholic schools to share the same person. So they get someone 1 day a week for hundreds of children. I mean, some of this money has to go towards the embedding of those personnel in the building so that it's rote, that we don't even think about it any other way.
And I think that's at the heart of where one of the questions that we received was going. Clearly, we know that there are capital improvements that need to be made. Last time I checked, there was still $1 billion of Plan Con money that the state hasn't come through with. And Lord knows in some of our schools, we have lead problems and some other things that clearly need to be done, new ventilation systems. There's no doubt that capital improvements need to be made to many, but we do need to sort of embrace that sort of continuous care model, that embeds programs, not sort of one-off. Maybe you're there for a year and you got to pull out. It's got to be a part of an education system. I think I have another one or two here. Let's try to get. Okay, so it's kind of a general question, but so parents. Obviously, I think the special education system is a challenge, right, for many parents, and it comes with a lot of uncertainty and a concern almost with how to sort of navigate, but also sort of interact in a positive way, for your kids. Is there some advice you would have for maybe parents new to the system with how to gain, the sort of information and perspective so they can help advocate for their children effectively?
Yeah, I would say two things.
And you're going. Oh, there you are. You're back.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say two things for newer folks. One is that there are special education consultants who are paid, trained advocates. Use them, find them. There happens to be a lot of them in Western Pennsylvania, and not all of them are entities or professionals that are necessarily going to charge you money. But to me, it's like getting a quick tutorial on what to expect, where some of the silos are, where some of the glitches are, and what people have done over the years to navigate those. And it also gives you the down to the letter of the law, what the entitlements are and what you can say to the school about, this is what I know I'm supposed to have, this is the timing I'm supposed to have it in, and this is what I want. Secondly, the best advocates in the world are parents that have done it already. And so, always building a network, right? Always having affiliations with others who have a shared mission. Parent advocates are some of the best educated advocates I've ever met in my life. And it's okay to approach the administrators and to approach the teachers in a way that isn't necessarily aggressive. Yes, we want to assert ourselves and assert the rights for our children or the entitlements that they have. But I've learned that if we just can talk to each other as human beings and really express that there's a lot of emotion here. There's a lot of economics here. There's a lot of stress here. I think more often than not, school districts will, and individuals within the school district will respond in a positive way.
Yeah, well, we may have time, I think, for two more. Let's try here. But one of the bills that I have kicked around for a couple terms has to do with universal mental health screenings. And universal can be a little bit, definitional. Well, the last version of the bill that I had done sought to amend the physical health form that, most a couple times during a kid's year or academic career, you have to go different points to get the physical filled out. And all I was attempting to do was to have that form amended to include a depression screen or something along that lines, where you could just check at the very least that the option was discussed. I went through a couple different versions between requiring it and then versus just saying at the very least the doctor went over with the parents and the student the values of certain screening. But what are your thoughts regarding mental health screenings for students?
Well, we do that here at Outreach on a regular basis. We have had the teen screen, which is a depression screening, a suicide risk kind of checklist. We now do have a new tool called the RAPS screen. And we can go into any school district anywhere in Allegheny County or the surrounding areas and provide it. It's simple, it's validated. These screens flag children who would otherwise fall through the cracks. Listen, when you take a kid who's down in the dumps and depressed into the pediatrician's office, it's known, it's seen, you can feel it. But a pediatrician who's just going to do maybe a 9-question required screen with the A or B student who is socially well adjusted and has a good family, you're never gonna see evidence that their depression and anxiety isn't going to manifest in such an overt way. And so I feel very strongly that we should be doing screens in every school at least once a year, and especially from middle school through high school. They're designed to grab and flag the kids that might not ask for help or who might not be showing symptoms that make a parent necessarily aware that there's an issue.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And actually, I think there was a pediatric group at some point who you may be referencing. I think they had somewhat of a similar recommendation, as to how those screens should be done. I think annually was there. Am I right? Was that the recommendation that came from a national group, I think?
I think so. I think most, that's how pediatricians' offices do it. I mean, they sort of present the checklist one time per year at the annual physical, right?
Yeah. So I appreciate it. Look, we're coming close to the end here. I see a couple others here. One person brought up teacher shortages and special education work in particular. Broadly, I would just comment on that too. Just say, look, part of that too is Pennsylvania's got to watch how it supports teachers. And about a decade ago, we kind of pushed out through a bunch of policy decisions thousands of people who were interested in the teaching profession. Those who really stayed with it ended up leaving state because of, I think, short-sightedness on our part. So there are things that Pennsylvania can do. The other thing, by the way, is got to watch the cost of some of our programs for teaching. Well, if you're coming out with $85,000 in debt for a teaching degree, you're likely to have some problems. By the way, that also includes on the paraprofessional side. We got to jack up support for that and really professionalize that career. That it's very important. So I also see something in here too about so I'll look to bring it back. Thank you. Yes. And again, I don't want to get too into another comment on the how to use the COVID Big children, okay. Well, look, what I can tell you this, and I want to thank as we wrap up here with Dr. Scanlon, because I know we're right up at the end. One of the reasons why we're glad to have this, well, we felt we had to have this event, and I'll be honest with you, I much prefer being in person, right? I think we all do.
Oh,
And
yes.
right, Doctor? And so us doing this event here, I know it's a challenge, right, for all of us. There's only so much, Doctor, that we all want to be online for, right? So, but we felt that given this year, it was important for us not to abandon the arena and not to fail to talk about these issues for our people young and old. And so that made us reach out. Of course, the doctor did a great presentation for us here today. And outreach has always been a tremendous, ally for our events, which we very much thank them for. Our whole point was we can't just ignore these issues, and we've got to do more. And I'll be honest with you, in Harrisburg, in my opinion, is not doing enough in relation to education of all of our children, but especially of those issues that were brought up by Dr. Scanlon here today. It's a lot to do when we push everything towards a volunteer school board with an underfunded, support, especially in the mental health arena, typically an underfunded support structure in the first place, as the doctor had referenced. We push all that to them and then hope that occasionally the education committee meets or something else. The state needs to do better. So that's where we're hoping to go with it. And I want to thank the doctor for all of her testimony, not her testimony, but her presentation today. Testimony. I'm used to the court, right? But thank you, doctor. So we do thank you. And I would note this, we are back at 1:30 with 2 next sessions for you to choose from. One on providing transition services during the pandemic, and the other one on teen mental health matters. Probably the doctor in particular would like, she'd probably be great for that one as well. But that's coming up to 1:30. So again, thank you, doctor. I want to thank Heather, and I think Iris was in on this one as well. Thank you all, and we'll see you at the next one. Doctor, again, all my best, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.